The Middle Ages feel so far away, a time of castles, knights, and plagues, a storybook world. But what if it wasn't? What if the people then were just like us, but with worse sanitation and a much higher chance of dying from a toothache? Over 1 billion people lived and died during that 1,000-year stretch. Right? They worried about money. They fell in love. They told jokes. They were bored. They were terrified of things they couldn't explain. We think we know their stories. The king, the queen, the knight who saves the princess. But those are just the polished stones on top of a deep, messy, and fascinating history. The real stories are in the margins. The stories of the people who didn't get statues. The gong farmer, the sin eater, the anchorite walled into a church. Their lives were stranger, harder, and more interesting than most fiction. What happens when you look past the shining armor? What do you find in the mud and the shadows? Let's forget the well-known tales. Let's look for the prompts hidden in the forgotten corners of a world that was just as complex and human as our own. Number 19. What if the Fae child was better? The prompt is this: a human child is taken by the Fae. A changeling is left in its place. Everyone knows this story. The changeling is usually sickly, cruel, or strange. The parents try to get rid of it by torturing it or leaving it on a hillside. But what if the changeling was actually a better child? What if it was kinder, smarter, and more loving than the human baby it replaced? This idea digs into a deep medieval fear. The world was full of unseen forces. The forest just beyond the village wasn't just trees, it was another kingdom, with its own rules. The Fae, or the good folk, were a part of that. They weren't Tinkerbell, they were powerful, amoral beings who could steal your milk, your luck, or your child. The concept of the changeling was a way to explain the unexplainable. Why would a healthy baby suddenly sicken and die? Why would a child be born with a physical deformity or a developmental disability? In a world without modern medical knowledge, it was easier to blame magic. The Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting manual from 1487, even has sections that conflate these folk beliefs with demonic activity. Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer, famously advised that a child he believed to be a changeling should be thrown into the river. The logic was terrifyingly simple. It's not a real child, so it's not murder. So imagine a family, their baby is colicky and cries all night. It's a strain on everyone. Then, one morning, that baby is gone. In its place is a calm, happy child, a child that learns to speak quickly, a child that helps with chores without being asked, a child that hums beautiful, unearthly melodies. The parents are terrified. This isn't their child. It's a monster from the woods. But the monster makes their lives better. The monster is a blessing. The story isn't about fighting the Fae anymore. You know, it's about a moral choice. Like, do you try to get your real child back, the difficult one, the one you're supposed to love? Or do you accept this new, better child? What does it say about you if you choose the changeling? It forces a medieval mindset to confront a modern question: is love based on blood or on connection? On duty or on daily happiness? The historian Carlo Ginzburg, in his book The Night Battles, explored the world of the Benandanti, Friulian peasants who believed their spirits left their bodies at night to fight witches and protect the harvest. Theirs was a world where the spiritual and the physical were completely intertwined. A changeling wasn't a metaphor, it was a real and present danger. A story about a good changeling would be deeply subversive. It would challenge the very nature of good and evil, human and inhuman, love and obligation. It would be a quiet, domestic horror story about the guilt of being happy. What are the real histories we will never know? How many children who were different, perhaps on the autism spectrum or with other neurodivergence, were left on hillsides or drowned in rivers because they were believed to be changelings? Did some parents secretly know their child was just a child but used the folklore as an excuse to rid themselves of a burden they couldn't handle? And what if, just once, the story was true, and a family raised a Fae child, never knowing the full truth of its magical and perhaps dangerous heritage? Number 18, what if the fool was the only one telling the truth? Here's the setup. A king's court is a web of lies. Nobles flatter the king for power. Her advisors whisper poison for influence. Everyone has a mask. The only one without a mask is the court jester, the fool. He's the only one telling the king the truth. But because he says it in jokes and riddles, nobody takes him seriously. The role of the court fool is one of the most interesting and misunderstood positions in the medieval and Renaissance world. We think of them as simple clowns juggling and making silly faces. The reality was much more complex. A good fool had to be intelligent, witty, and a keen observer of human nature. They existed in a strange social space, both inside and outside the hierarchy of the court. Their official status as a fool or natural, someone with a mental or physical disability, gave them a unique license. They could say things to the king that would get a nobleman executed. Think of Will Sommers, the court jester of King Henry VIII. He was one of the few people who could tease the notoriously short-tempered king and get away with it. There are accounts of Sommers gently mocking Henry's decisions or even pointing out the poverty of his subjects. He was a trusted companion, an entertainer, but also a kind of pressure valve for the court. The French had Triboulet, the jester to King Louis XII and Francis I, whose legendary wit got him into and out of constant trouble. He was once sentenced to death by Francis I, but the king, fond of him, said he could choose the manner of his death. Triboulet famously replied, "Good sire, for St. Netutia's and St. Pansard's sake, patrons of insanity, I choose to die of old age." The king laughed and banished him instead. Now place the story in this context. The king is making a terrible decision. Maybe he's planning a foolish war based on bad advice from a greedy general. Or he's about to marry a princess who is secretly a spy. Everyone sees it, but everyone is too scared to speak up. Their careers, their lives are on the line. Only the fool speaks. He doesn't make a grand speech. He sings a silly song about a lion who trusts a fox. He juggles 3 apples and calls them our kingdom, our treasury, and common sense, and then he purposefully drops the common sense one. He tells a riddle whose answer is treason. The king just laughs. The court laughs with him, nervously. But does the king hear the message underneath the joke? Is the fool a brave truth-teller, or just a man who has learned that humor is the only armor that works against power? The story's tension comes from this ambiguity. The fool is playing the most dangerous game in the kingdom. Each joke is a roll of the dice. He's trying to save the kingdom with punchlines. It's a story about courage, but not the kind with swords. It's the courage of speaking truth to power, even if you have to dress it up in a fool's costume to do it. What secrets died with these jesters? How many major historical events were subtly influenced by a well-timed joke or a critical riddle that a monarch actually listened to? Were there fools who tried to warn their masters of plots, like the assassination of a king, only to be dismissed as telling another joke? And conversely, how many fools were not truth-tellers at all, but clever spies for rival factions, using their unique access to plant ideas or gather information under the guise of foolishness? Well, number 17, what if the outcast held the key? Imagine this: a former noble, a knight or a lady, has contracted leprosy. They've been cast out of the city. They live in a leper colony beyond the walls, forced to wear special clothes and ring a bell to warn people of their approach. They have lost everything, their family, their status, their name, but they still have a memory. They know a secret about their old life, their old family, and now that family is in terrible danger, and the only person who can save them is the outcast they abandoned. Leprosy, now known as Hansen's disease, was the great terror of the medieval world. It was poorly understood, thought to be highly contagious, and seen as a sign of divine punishment. The diagnosis of leprosy was a social death sentence. A ceremony, the separatio leprosorum, was often performed. It was essentially a funeral service for a living person. The person was declared legally dead. Their property was inherited, their marriage was dissolved, they were then forced to leave their community forever. Leper hospitals or leprosaria were established all over Europe. By the year 1225, the historian Matthew Paris estimated there were as many as 19,000 of them across Christendom. These weren't hospitals in the modern sense, they were hospices, places of confinement where the afflicted could live out their days in prayer and isolation, supported by charity. The people inside were a society of ghosts. So, our story starts here in this community of the damned. Our protagonist isn't just a leper, they are a former person of importance. They remember the secret passages in the family castle. They know where the fraudulent deed is hidden that could prove their greedy cousin is a usurper. They know the secret weakness of the rival lord who is about to attack their old home. The conflict is immediate and powerful. To save the people who threw them away, they must re-enter a world that has declared them dead. Every interaction is fraught with danger. They can't just walk into the city. They are a monster to the people they once knew. They would have to disguise themselves, risk being caught and killed. They would need help. Who would help a leper? Maybe another outcast, a prostitute, a disgraced priest. The story becomes a thriller, driven by the protagonist's ticking clock. Their body is failing, and their family's time is running out. It's a story about identity. Are you defined by your name and your face, or by your knowledge and your loyalty? It's also a story about forgiveness. Can the protagonist forgive the family that abandoned them? Do they even want to? Maybe their motivation isn't love, but a final act of duty, a way to reclaim a piece of their old honor before they die. The setting is rich with sensory detail, the sound of the leper's bell, the smell of medicinal herbs, the sight of the city walls that represent a life they can never have again. What did it feel like to be pronounced dead while you were still alive? How many of the thousands confined to leprosaria were misdiagnosed, suffering from other skin conditions like psoriasis or scrofula, and were exiled for no reason? And what incredible knowledge, what family secrets and political truths were taken to the grave in these isolated communities, lost forever because the people who held them had been rendered voiceless by their disease. Number 16, what if your job was to start a war? The prompt is simple. You are a royal messenger. You are given a letter to deliver to a neighboring king. The contents of the letter are lies, carefully crafted to provoke that king into declaring war. Your orders are to deliver it. Your loyalty is to your own king. But delivering this letter will cause the deaths of thousands of innocent people. What do you do? Communication in the Middle Ages was a physical, dangerous act. There were no emails or phone calls. A message traveled at the speed of a horse or a ship. Messengers were vital. They had to be trustworthy, hardy, and often expendable. They faced bandits, bad weather, political enemies, and the simple risk of getting lost. The fate of kingdoms could rest in their saddlebags. The Battle of Hastings in 1066 was lost by Harold Godwinson, in part because he had already marched his army north to fight off a Viking invasion at Stamford Bridge. He won that battle, but the news of William the Conqueror's landing in the south took days to reach him, forcing a frantic march back that left his army exhausted. Our story focuses on the person in the middle of this information chain. They aren't a king or a knight. They are a functionary, a cog in the machine of the state, but this one time they are the most important person in the world. They hold a war in their hands. Let's give them a reason to care. Maybe their home village is on the border with the other kingdom. The very people who will be the first to die are their friends, their distant cousins. They have shared harvests and festivals with these people. They know them not as the enemy, but as people. Or maybe the messenger is a veteran of a previous war and has seen firsthand the horror of what they are about to unleash. They remember the screams and the smell of blood. The journey becomes a moral crucible. Every step brings them closer to a point of no return. Do they lose the letter? But if they do, their own king will likely have them hunted down and executed for treason. Their family back home could be punished. Do they alter the letter? They would need the skill to forge a royal seal, and the risk of discovery is immense. Do they deliver the letter, but with a secret verbal warning to the other king, who would believe a lowly messenger over the written word of a rival monarch? This is a story about the ethics of obedience. When does duty become a crime? It explores the idea that most great historical tragedies are not caused by a single evil person, but by hundreds of ordinary people just following orders. The messenger is one of those people, but we are inside their head. We feel their sweat and their fear. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, writing about the Holocaust, coined the term the banality of evil to describe how normal people could become agents of terror. This story is a medieval exploration of that same idea. It's not about good versus evil. It's about a good person being ordered to do an evil thing for what their king claims is the greater good. How many historical documents have been intentionally lost or altered in transit by messengers with a conscience, changing the course of history in ways we can't even measure? Were messengers ever used as double agents, carrying one letter but delivering another that was secretly provided by a rival faction within their own court? And what about the opposite? How many messengers were completely unaware that the seemingly innocuous letter of greeting they carried actually contained a coded message that sealed a dark alliance or ordered a political assassination. Number 15, what if you knew the cathedral would fall? Here's the idea. You are the master mason, the architect of a great Gothic cathedral. It's your life's work. Hundreds of people are working on it. The whole town's pride and money are invested in it. But you have discovered a fatal flaw in your own design, a miscalculation in the load-bearing columns or the stress on the flying buttresses. It might stand for a year or for 50 years, but eventually it is going to collapse, killing hundreds, maybe thousands of worshippers. Gothic cathedrals were the moonshots of the Middle Ages. They were astonishing feats of engineering, faith, and ambition. Buildings like the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, begun in 1163, or Chartres Cathedral in France, pushed the limits of what was possible with stone and glass. Master masons were not just builders, they were engineers, artists, and project managers. They held secrets of geometry and physics passed down through guilds. Their names are often lost to history, but their work still stands. A man named William Ascens was the original architect for the rebuilding of Canterbury Cathedral after a fire in 1174, but he fell from the scaffolding and was crippled, forced to direct the work from his sickbed before returning to France. Our protagonist is a man like this. He has dedicated his life to this single building. It is his prayer, his legacy. Now he faces an impossible choice. If he admits his mistake, his career is over. He will be shamed, possibly ruined. The bishop and the town patrons who funded the project will be furious. The work will have to be torn down, a catastrophic waste of time and money. The shame could crush the town's spirit, but if he stays silent, he condemns future generations. He imagines the sound of the stone groaning, the stained glass windows shattering, the screams of people crushed under his magnificent failure. His monument to God would become a tomb. The story unfolds in the heart of the construction site. The daily sounds of hammers on stone, the shouts of workmen, the smell of mortar and sawdust. The master mason walks through his own creation, but now he sees it differently. He sees the hairline cracks no one else notices. He feels a vibration in the floor that feels like a death tremor. Every hymn, sung in the half-finished nave, sounds like a funeral dirge. He might try to fix it in secret, ordering stronger mortar for one section, subtly reinforcing a buttress, hoping it will be enough. But he knows it won't. He is in a prison of his own making. The narrative tension is entirely internal. Does he save his reputation, or does he save innocent lives? It's a story about pride, responsibility, and the conflict between human ambition and physical reality. It's a professional and spiritual crisis of the highest order. His attempt to build a house for God might become his ultimate sin. How many of the great cathedrals that fell over the centuries, like the one at Beauvais in 1284, collapsed not because of fires or wars, but because of a quiet, hidden design flaw that the original architect knew about and was too afraid or too proud to admit? Were guild secrets ever used to sabotage a rival architect's building, introducing a subtle weakness that would only reveal itself decades later? And are there cathedrals still standing today that have a hidden fatal flaw, a ticking time bomb of stone and faith that we simply haven't discovered yet? Number 14, what if you were the last one who remembered the old gods? The scene, a small, isolated village. It has been officially Christian for a generation or two. There's a stone church in the center of town now, where a sacred grove used to be. The priest preaches about the one God, about heaven and hell, and almost everyone believes him. But you don't. You are old. You remember the songs your grandmother sang. You remember the offerings left at the base of the old oak tree. You remember the names of the old gods, the spirits of the river and the forest. And you are the only one left. The Christianization of Europe was not an overnight event. It was a slow, messy process that took centuries. Often, it was a top-down conversion. A king, like Clovis of the Franks around 496 AD, would convert for political reasons, and his kingdom would officially follow. But on the village level, old beliefs died hard. This blending of beliefs is called syncretism. People didn't just drop their old ways, they adapted them. Local goddesses were turned into local saints. Pagan holidays were repurposed. The winter solstice celebration became Christmas. The spring festival of Eostri lent its name to Easter. But our story is about someone who refuses to adapt. They see the new religion as a foreign import, a pale imitation of the vibrant, living world they grew up with. When the villagers pray to Saint Christopher to protect them on a journey, our protagonist whispers a prayer to the old god of the crossroads. When the priest blesses the fields with holy water, they secretly bury an offering of grain for the Earth Mother. They are completely alone. To speak of their beliefs would be dangerous. It would be heresy. They could be ostracized or worse, so they live a double life. By day, they are a quiet, respectable member of the Christian community. By night, they are the last priest or priestess of a dead religion. The story would be quiet, melancholic. It's not about a big, dramatic fight. It's about the silent struggle to keep a world alive inside your own mind. What happens when a crisis comes? A drought, a plague. The priest's prayers don't work. The villagers become desperate. Does our protagonist step forward? Do they offer the old ways as a solution? To do so would be to risk everything, but to do nothing would be to let their entire heritage, the memory of their gods, die with them. The story could be seen as a metaphor for any cultural loss. The last speaker of a dying language. The last person who knows the traditional crafts. It's about memory and the weight of being the sole keeper of a tradition. It's a profoundly lonely struggle. The character's goal isn't to defeat Christianity. It's just to make sure the names of the old gods are whispered one last time before the forest falls completely silent. As the historian Ronald Hutton has shown in his work on paganism, a lot of what we think we know about these old religions is reconstruction. This story is about the person who held the genuine article, just as it was about to vanish. How many folk traditions and bits of local superstition that were recorded in the 19th century were actually the last faint echoes of pre-Christian belief systems passed down in secret for 1,000 years? Did some isolated communities maintain a dual belief system, attending church on Sunday but making offerings to the old gods on Monday, far longer than the official histories admit? And what knowledge about the natural world, about herbal medicine or ecological balance, was lost forever when the belief systems that encoded that knowledge were wiped out? That's number 13. What if the pig was guilty? The premise is this. A pig has killed a child. This isn't an accident. Witnesses say the pig attacked the child in a fit of rage. Now the pig has been arrested and is being put on trial. You are the lawyer assigned to defend the pig. Everyone in the town, including the judge, thinks it's a ridiculous but necessary formality. They want the pig executed, but as you investigate, you start to believe the pig might not be the real killer. This sounds absurd to us, but animal trials were a real and documented part of the medieval and early modern legal system. From the 9th century to the 19th century, there are records of dozens of animals, from pigs and rats to weevils, being formally prosecuted for crimes. In 1386, a pig in Falaise, France, was found guilty of murdering a child. It was dressed in human clothes, maimed in the head and legs to mimic the child's injuries, and then publicly hanged in the town square. The legal scholar E.P. Evans cataloged these cases in his 1906 book, The Criminal Prosecution and Capital Punishment of Animals. These trials were not jokes, they were conducted with the full solemnity of the law. Animals were provided with lawyers, witnesses were called, evidence was presented. The legal theory behind it was complex, tied to ideas of community responsibility and the theological concept that animals, as part of God's creation, were also subject to his laws. An animal that committed a crime had disturbed the moral order of the universe, and that order needed to be restored through a legal process. So, our story is a medieval courtroom drama. The lawyer is our protagonist. At first, he sees the case as a joke, a career-ending embarrassment, defending a pig. But he is a man of the law, he has to do his job. He starts investigating, he talks to the witnesses. He examines the scene of the crime, and he starts to find inconsistencies. The bite marks on the child don't quite match the pig's teeth. One of the key witnesses has a grudge against the pig's owner. He starts to suspect that the pig is a scapegoat, that the real killer is human, and they are using the pig to cover their tracks. Now the lawyer has a real problem. Accusing a pig of murder is one thing. Accusing a person is another. He could be putting his own life in danger. The town wants a simple, clean resolution. They want to hang the pig and feel safe again. They do not want a complicated human murder mystery that could tear their community apart. The story becomes a quest for justice against a wall of prejudice and superstition. The lawyer has to use all his skill to create reasonable doubt for a client that cannot speak, that everyone has already condemned. It highlights the strangeness of the medieval worldview, where the boundaries between the human and animal, the legal and the divine, were much more fluid than they are today. It's a murder mystery where the prime suspect is livestock. What was the real purpose of these trials? Were they a genuine attempt at justice, a way for communities to process trauma and restore a sense of order after a shocking event? Or were they a form of ritual scapegoating, a way to project human anxieties onto the natural world? And could it be that in some of these historical cases, the animal was indeed framed to cover up a human crime, a secret that is now buried forever in the court records of a pig's execution? Number 12. What if the cure was the crime? Here is the story. You are a cunning woman in a small village. You're not a witch. You don't cast spells or worship the devil. You are a healer. You know the herbs. You know which plants reduce a fever, which poultice draws out an infection, which tea soothes a troubled mind. You are the village doctor, midwife, and therapist, all rolled into one. But a new priest has come to town. He is zealous. He believes your knowledge is not from God, but from Satan. And when the Lord's son falls ill and the university-trained physician can't help him, your cure is his only hope. But to heal him is to prove the priest right and condemn yourself. The line between medicine, magic, and religion was incredibly blurry in the Middle Ages. Formal medicine was based on the theories of Galen and the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. It was practiced by university-educated physicians who were rare and expensive. For most ordinary people, healthcare came from local sources. It came from women like our protagonist. These unnamed folk were a vital part of the community. Their knowledge was practical, passed down through generations. They used herbal remedies, charms, and folk wisdom. For most of the Middle Ages, the church was relatively tolerant of these practices, as long as they didn't stray into outright heresy. But as the period wore on, especially into the 15th century, attitudes began to harden. The great European witch hunts were still in the future, but the seeds were being sown. Figures like the Dominican Inquisitor Heinrich Kramer, co-author of the Malleus Maleficarum, began to systematically associate folk magic and healing with diabolical witchcraft. Kramer was particularly suspicious of midwives and female healers. Our story is set on this knife's edge. The cunning woman is respected, but she is also feared. Her knowledge is a source of power, and power in a woman was always suspect. The conflict is clear. The Lord's son is dying. The physician, with his expensive bleedings and useless prescriptions based on astrology, has failed. The Lord, in his desperation, turns to the one person he has been taught to despise. If the cunning woman succeeds, she saves the boy. But how does she explain her success? The priest will claim it could only have been done with the devil's help. A real miracle can only come from God, through the church. Her healing becomes evidence of her witchcraft. If she fails or refuses to help, the child dies, and she might be blamed for that too. She might be accused of cursing the child in the first place. She is trapped. Her own skill is the weapon that will be used against her. The story is a tense drama about the clash of worldviews, the practical, earth-based knowledge of the folk healer versus the rigid, text-based dogma of the institutional church. It's a story about the persecution of knowledge and the fear of female power. It shows how easily a reputation for healing can be twisted into an accusation of witchcraft, especially when driven by fear, jealousy, and religious fanaticism. How much medical knowledge, particularly regarding herbalism and women's health, was lost forever when the women who held it were persecuted as witches? Were some accusations of witchcraft actually driven by professional jealousy from male physicians who resented the success of local, unlicensed female healers? And how many women, faced with the impossible choice our protagonist faces, chose to let a patient die rather than risk demonstrating a miraculous cure that would sign their own death warrant? Number 11. What if you overheard a plot from a sewer? The prompt: you are a gong farmer. It is one of the worst jobs imaginable. You work at night, emptying the city's latrines and cesspits. You are shunned, considered unclean. People hold their noses when you pass. But because you are invisible, because no one pays attention to the man covered in filth, you hear things. And one night, while emptying the privy of a wealthy merchant's house, you overhear a plot to assassinate the king. Life in a medieval city was crowded and unsanitary. London in the 14th century had a population of maybe 80,000 people crammed into 1 square mile. Waste disposal was a constant problem. Gong farmers, or nightmen, performed an essential public health service. The word gong came from an Old English word for to go. They were legally required to work only at night, and they were often restricted to living in certain areas of the city. It was a dangerous job. The fumes could be toxic, but it was also surprisingly well paid because of how unpleasant it was. Our protagonist is at the absolute bottom of the social ladder. They are not just poor, they are ritually unclean. Their job makes them a pariah. This social invisibility is their greatest weakness, but also their greatest strength. The powerful men meeting in the room above the privy don't even consider that the man cleaning their waste could be a threat. They speak freely, and he hears everything. Now he has this terrible knowledge. What does he do with it? Who would believe him? If he goes to the city guard, they would probably laugh at him, or whip him for wasting their time. A filthy gong farmer accusing powerful, respected merchants. It's unthinkable. He has no proof, just his word, and his word is worthless. The story becomes a desperate race against time. He has to find a way to get this information to someone who will listen, someone who can stop the plot. Maybe he tries to leave an anonymous note, maybe he tries to get a message to a priest he thinks is honest. Every attempt is a huge risk. The plotters are powerful. If they find out he knows, they will kill him without a second thought. He is the ultimate underdog. This is a story that flips the typical medieval fantasy on its head. The hero isn't a knight in shining armor. He's a man who smells so bad that people cross the street to avoid him. His courage isn't shown on a battlefield, but in the stinking alleys of a medieval city. It explores the vast social chasms of the era. It gives a voice to the voiceless and shows how the most important secrets can be found in the most despised places. It's a thriller from the perspective of someone who history has completely forgotten. How many major political plots were overheard and foiled by servants, laborers, or other invisible people whose names were never recorded? Did the strict social hierarchies of the time create a kind of blindness in the nobility, making them careless about what they said in front of those they considered their inferiors? What other secrets, not of treason, but of commerce, love, and crime, were routinely heard and kept by the silent army of workers who cleaned the houses and emptied the privies of the powerful? Number 10. What if you controlled the most boring, most important thing? The setup. You are not a lord. You are not a warrior. You are a salt merchant. And in a world without refrigeration, you control everything. Salt is life. It preserves meat and fish, allowing armies to march and cities to survive the winter. It's a source of immense wealth and power. A local lord is trying to seize control of your salt trade. You can't fight him with swords. You have to fight him with economics. We often forget the importance of mundane things. Salt was the oil of the Middle Ages. The word salary comes from the Latin salarium, which was the money Roman soldiers were given to buy salt. Cities like Venice built their immense wealth in part on controlling the salt trade. Trade routes for salt crisscross Europe, like the old salt route in Germany. Wars were fought over salt mines, and taxation on salt, like the gabelle in France, was a major source of royal income and public resentment. Our story is about this hidden power. The protagonist is a merchant, a member of the rising bourgeois class that was becoming a new center of power in the late Middle Ages. They are looked down upon by the old landed aristocracy who see trade as vulgar. The local lord sees the merchant's wealth and wants it. He probably tries to use traditional feudal power to get it. He imposes crippling taxes, he hires thugs to disrupt the salt caravans, he tries to intimidate the merchant into submission. The merchant can't raise an army, but they have other weapons. They can manipulate the supply. They can create a salt shortage in the Lord's domain, making the common people angry at him. They can use their trade connections to fund the Lord's rivals. They can call in debts the Lord owes to other merchants, creating a financial crisis for him. It's a game of chess, not a brawl. It's a conflict between old feudal power based on land and violence and new capitalist power based on money and trade. The story would explore the mechanics of the medieval economy. We would see the salt mines, the caravans, the warehouses, the markets. We would see how a change in the price of a single commodity could affect everyone, from the king down to the poorest peasant salting a fish for the winter. It's a thriller where the weapons are contracts and letters of credit. The climax might not be a sword fight, but a moment in the market where the Lord realizes he is financially ruined, completely outmaneuvered by the lowly merchant. The historian Fernand Braudel argued that it was these slow underlying structures of everyday life, like the trade in grain and salt, that truly shaped history, more so than the battles and reigns of kings. This story lives in that Braudelian world. It celebrates a different kind of cleverness, a different kind of hero. What intricate economic wars were fought in parallel to the military ones, with merchants and bankers as the generals? How often did a king's campaign fail, not because of a lost battle, but because a consortium of Italian bankers decided to cut off his credit? And how many peasant revolts were sparked not by abstract ideals of freedom, but by a sudden punitive tax on a basic necessity of life like salt? Number 9. What if the king's pet escaped? Imagine this. You are the keeper of the king's royal menagerie. The king loves his collection of exotic animals. They are a symbol of his power and wealth. His favorite is a leopard, a gift from a foreign sultan. One night, a careless apprentice leaves the cage unlocked, and the leopard escapes into the city. You have until dawn to find the beast before the king finds out. If you fail, it's not just your job on the line. It's your head. Royal menageries were a feature of many medieval courts. They were status symbols. Owning an animal from a distant land showed how far your influence and wealth reached. The most famous was the Tower of London Menagerie, which was established by King John in the early 13th century. It housed lions, a polar bear, which was allowed to fish in the Thames, and in 1255, King Henry III received an African elephant from Louis IX of France. The public was fascinated and terrified by these creatures. They were glimpses of a world beyond their own. Our story is a frantic nighttime hunt through the streets of a medieval city. The keeper is our hero. He knows the animal. He raised it. He knows it's probably more frightened than dangerous, but the people of the city won't see it that way. To them it's a monster, a demon. The moment the first scream is heard, panic will grip the city. The keeper has to move in secret. He can't alert the city guard because that would mean alerting the king. He has to rely on his own skills and a few trusted friends, maybe the hapless apprentice who made the mistake. Maybe a poacher who knows how to track animals. The city at night is a different world. Dark, dangerous alleys, watchmen on their patrols. The story becomes an urban adventure. It's a race against two clocks, the rising sun, which will reveal the leopard to the public, and the king's temper. As the keeper tracks the animal, we get a tour of the medieval city at its most intimate. He follows tracks through a muddy market square, past a tanner's yard, into the cloisters of a sleeping monastery. He has to deal with drunks, thieves, and suspicious guards, all without revealing the true nature of his search. The story is about responsibility and the precariousness of life in service to a powerful, whimsical ruler. The keeper's life is in danger because of a simple mistake. It also explores the relationship between humans and animals. The keeper doesn't see the leopard as a monster. He sees it as a magnificent displaced creature. He wants to save it, not just to save his own skin, but because he cares for it. The climax could be a tense standoff where he has to gentle the terrified animal before a panicked mob kills it. How do keepers actually manage to care for these animals with so little knowledge of their natural habitats and dietary needs? What was the mortality rate in these menageries, and what other strange events occurred that were never written down? Did an elephant ever really get loose in 13th century London? What chaos would that have caused, and how would the authorities have covered it up? Number 8, what? If the doctor trusted the stars more than the body. The prompt. You are a respected physician. You have studied at the great universities of Bologna or Padua. But your secret is that you believe the stars are more important than symptoms. You diagnose illness by casting a patient's horoscope. You determine the best time for surgery by the position of the moon. Now the queen is gravely ill. The other royal physicians are baffled. You have been summoned. You cast her horoscope and see a planetary alignment that means certain death. Do you tell the king the truth you see in the stars, or do you try to find a physical cure that your own philosophy tells you is useless? This is not as far-fetched as it sounds. Medical astrology was a serious and integral part of mainstream medieval medicine. It wasn't considered superstition, it was science. The macrocosm, the universe, was believed to directly influence the microcosm, the human body. Each of the 12 zodiac signs was thought to govern a part of the body, from Aries the head to Pisces the feet. The planets were associated with different qualities, and the 4 humors. Mars was hot and dry. The moon was cold and moist. A physician would consult an almanac and an astrolabe. They would create a detailed astrological chart for the patient based on their birth time and the time they fell ill. This chart would determine the diagnosis, the prognosis, and the treatment. For example, it was considered extremely dangerous to perform surgery or bloodletting on a part of the body when the moon was in the corresponding zodiac sign. The influential 14th century physician John of Ardern wrote extensively on the importance of astrology in surgery. Our protagonist is a man of his time. He is not a quack. He is a learned man practicing what he believes to be the highest form of medicine. He is called to the queen's bedside. He examines her, yes, but his most important work is done with his charts and astronomical tables. The other physicians are fussing with her pulse, and the color of her urine. Uroscopy was another key diagnostic tool. He is looking to the heavens. The celestial chart tells him there is no hope. The stars have aligned against her. His duty, as he sees it, is to be honest, to prepare the king for the inevitable. But the king is a desperate man who loves his wife. He doesn't want astrology, he wants a cure. And what if the physician, despite his beliefs, notices a small physical symptom that the others have missed? A faint rash, a slight swelling, something that suggests a physical cause, a poison perhaps, that has nothing to do with the planet Saturn. He is now in a crisis of faith. Does he trust his lifelong belief system, the science of the stars that has guided his entire career? Or does he trust the small contradictory evidence of his own eyes? To abandon astrology would be to abandon his entire intellectual world. To ignore the physical symptom could be to condemn the queen. The story becomes a battle between two kinds of science, two ways of seeing the world, played out over the life of a single patient. How many patients died because a physician delayed a necessary procedure, waiting for a more auspicious alignment of the planets? Was medical astrology ever used nefariously to prove that a rival was destined to die, thereby justifying a lack of treatment or even something worse? And what if the system, by pure chance, actually worked sometimes, reinforcing the belief in its efficacy and leading practitioners even further from empirical observation? Number 7. What if the dead man had no sins? The idea you are a sin eater, a complete outcast, your job is to take on the sins of the recently deceased. You are summoned to a deathbed. A ritual meal of bread and ale is placed on the chest of the corpse. You eat the meal, and in doing so, you absorb all the sins of the dead person, allowing their soul to pass peacefully to the afterlife. It's a holy service that makes you unholy, but tonight you are called to the bedside of a man who, with his dying breath, confessed to his family that he had never sinned in his entire life. The historical evidence for sin eaters is debated. The concept is most strongly associated with folklore from Wales and the English border counties, with accounts persisting well into the 19th century. The antiquarian John Aubrey gave a famous description of the practice in the 1680s. The sin eater was a figure of both terror and necessity. They were paid a small fee for their service, but they were shunned. They were believed to be weighed down by the cumulative sins of everyone they had cleansed. They were a walking embodiment of the community's transgressions. Our story begins with this strange summons. The sin eater arrives at a house of mourning. He is used to being treated with fear and disgust. But this time is different. The family is confused, terrified. Their father, a man known for his piety, has made this impossible claim. He lived a blameless life. The sin eater's job is a transaction. He takes on sin. If there is no sin, what is he supposed to do? To perform the ritual would be a lie. Refuse would be to deny the family the comfort and closure they desperately need. The dead man's soul, they believe, cannot rest without the ritual. The sin eater starts to ask questions. He is an expert in sin, after all. He has metaphorically eaten every crime and failing imaginable. He starts to talk to the family, to the servants. He pieces together the dead man's life. And he discovers the truth. The man wasn't a saint. He was something far more complex. Maybe his great sin was one of omission, a failure to act at a crucial moment that caused great harm to someone else, a sin so profound he couldn't even confess it. Or maybe, and more chillingly, the man was a sociopath, someone so lacking in conscience that he genuinely did not believe he had ever done anything wrong. The story becomes a psychological and theological detective story. The sin eater, this reviled outcast, is the only one who can uncover the true moral state of the dead man. He has to diagnose the soul. The climax is the ritual itself. What does he do? Does he perform it, taking on a sin that may or may not be there? Does he confront the family with the harsh truth of their father's life? His decision will determine the fate of the dead man's soul and the family's memory of him. If sin eaters did exist, what was the psychological toll on the person who performed this role? Did they come to believe they were truly damned? How did the church, which offered its own system for absolving sin through confession and last rites, view this folk practice? Was it tolerated as a harmless superstition, or was it condemned as a blasphemous parody of the Eucharist? And what was the darkest sin a sin-eater ever had to consume? Number 6. What if your prison was a holy choice? The setting. A small stone cell, no bigger than a parking space, attached to the wall of a church. It has 3 windows. One looks into the church so you can see the altar. One is for food and waste to be passed through. And one looks out onto the graveyard. This is your world. You chose it. You are an anchorite, a religious recluse. You were walled into this cell in a public ceremony, with a bishop performing last rites for you. You are dead to the world, alive only to God. And one day, through your window to the church, you see something you were not meant to see. The practice of anchortism was a recognized form of religious life in the Middle Ages, especially for women. An anchorite or anchoress was not a nun in a convent. They were solitary. After a period of probation and a formal enclosure ceremony, the door to their cell was literally bricked up. They were there for life. Famous anchoresses like Julian of Norwich, who lived in the 14th century, became important spiritual figures. People would come to their graveyard window seeking advice and prayers. The Ancrine Wis, a 13th century guide for anchoresses, gives detailed instructions on their life of prayer and contemplation. Our story puts a thriller inside this tiny, holy space. The protagonist has chosen this life of extreme piety. Her days are a rigid cycle of prayer and meditation. She has renounced everything. But she is still human. She still has eyes and ears. Through her window into the church, her squint, she witnesses a crime. Maybe she sees the priest stealing from the collection box, a small sin, or maybe it's something bigger. She sees 2 nobles meeting in secret, exchanging a letter that she recognizes as a treasonous plot. Or worst of all, she witnesses a murder committed in the sanctity of the church itself. She is trapped. She has taken a vow of silence and separation from the world. Her entire purpose is to be outside of worldly affairs, but she is the only witness. What can she do? She can't leave. The door is bricked up. If she tries to shout, who will listen? Who would break the sacred seal of her cell based on a frantic cry? They would probably think she had been driven mad by solitude or tempted by a demon. Her tiny cell becomes a place of unbearable tension. She has to find a way to communicate her secret to the outside world without breaking her vows, without being dismissed as a lunatic. Maybe she tries to communicate in code to the servant who brings her food. Maybe she tries to get a message to one of the trustworthy townspeople who comes to her window for counsel. She has to use the very limited tools of her cloistered life to intervene in the world she has sworn to abandon. It's a story about the conflict between spiritual vows and moral duty. It proves that you can't wall out the world entirely. What was the psychological reality of a lifetime spent in a single tiny room? How many anchorites truly found spiritual peace, and how many descended into madness? Were these cells ever used for more worldly purposes, as places to pass secret messages, or as a form of holy imprisonment for an inconvenient family member? And what other secrets of both the sacred and profane were witnessed through those small windows and then taken to the grave? Number 5. What if you found a kingdom secret in the mud? The scene. The banks of a great river, like the Thames in London. The tide is out, leaving behind a slick of gray, stinking mud. You are a child, a mudlark. You spend your days wading through the filth, searching for anything of value, a lost coin, a piece of scrap metal, a lump of coal. It's a miserable existence. But today, your fingers close around something different. Not a coin, a signet ring, and you recognize the crest. It's the king's, the one he supposedly lost in a hunting accident a month ago. But the ring is tied to a small weighted leather pouch, and inside that pouch is a letter that proves the king's accident was a carefully planned assassination orchestrated by his own brother. Mudlarking was a real occupation, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, but the practice of scavenging the riverbanks for a living is ancient. The rivers that ran through medieval cities were both highways and sewers. Everything ended up in them. They were a flowing repository of the city's secrets and trash. Finding things in the Thames mud provides archaeologists with incredible insights into daily life. Our protagonist is a child from the lowest rungs of society. They are invisible, impoverished, and powerless. and now they hold the most dangerous secret in the kingdom. The discovery of the ring and the letter is like finding a bomb. What does a child do with this kind of power? They can't just go to the authorities. The new king is the man who staged the assassination. The city guard works for him. To reveal the letter would be to sign their own death warrant. They could try to sell the ring. It's gold. It would feed their family for a year, but anyone who saw it would recognize it. It's too dangerous to sell. The story becomes a child's eye view of a political conspiracy. The Moodlark has to navigate a world of power they don't understand. They are a mouse that has stolen the cheese from the lion's den. Maybe they try to get the letter to someone they think they can trust, a kind priest, a noble, who was known to be loyal to the old king. But how do they even get access to such a person? It's a story of immense vulnerability and unexpected agency. The fate of the kingdom rests in the hands of a child who probably can't read. Their only assets are their knowledge of the city's hidden ways. The back alleys, the sewer drains, the places where a small person can hide. The tension comes from this massive imbalance of power. The entire force of the state could be brought down on this one child if they make a single mistake. It's a David and Goliath story, but David's only slingshot is a piece of incriminating parchment. How many objects of historical significance were simply lost to the mud of a river, their secrets washed away by the tide? Could the evidence of a real historical crime, a lost royal jewel, or a discarded murder weapon, still be lying on a riverbed waiting to be found? And how many times did the poor and powerless stumble across the secrets of the rich and powerful, only to be silenced before they could ever speak? Number 4, what if your map was a weapon? The prompt: you are a map maker, a cartographer in a monastery. Your job is to create beautiful, accurate maps of the world. A powerful duke commissions you to create a new map of the region, but he gives you a secret instruction. Your map must be a lie. You are to subtly shrink the lands of his rival, Lord Percy, and expand the Duke's own territory. You must erase villages loyal to Percy and add new fictional ones loyal to the Duke. Your map will be presented at a royal council to settle a border dispute. It will be used as undeniable proof. You are being asked to redraw the world not as it is, but as your patron wants it to be. Medieval maps were not like modern maps. They were not primarily tools for navigation. They were often theological or political documents. The famous Mappa Mundi, like the one from Hereford Cathedral, created around 1300, were visual encyclopedias of history, mythology, and faith. Jerusalem was often placed at the center of the world. Strange, monstrous races were drawn at the edges. Maps told a story about the world and your place in it, but maps were also used for more practical political purposes. Property disputes, border claims, and military planning all required maps, and the person who draws the map holds the power. The historian P.D.A. Harvey, a specialist in early maps, has shown how they were used as instruments of power and persuasion. A map could create a fact on the ground just by depicting it on parchment. Our cartographer is caught in an ethical dilemma. They are a craftsman, an artist, a scholar. They take pride in the accuracy of their work. They believe a map should represent the truth of God's creation, but their patron is powerful and dangerous. To refuse his request could mean the end of their monastery's funding, or worse. The story would be a quiet, meticulous thriller. The work of making a map is slow and detailed. Every line the cartographer draws is a moral choice. He stretches a river here, moves a forest there. He feels the weight of the lie in every stroke of his pen. He is committing a kind of forgery that could lead to war, or at the very least, the unjust seizure of land from thousands of people. He might try to fight back in a subtle way. He could embed a secret flaw in the map, a cartographer's trap that only another expert would notice. He could try to smuggle a true copy of the map to Lord Percy's faction. But all of this is incredibly risky. The tension is in the details, the mixing of the pigments, the stretching of the vellum, the careful calligraphy that spells out the name of a village that doesn't exist. It's a story about the power of information and the corruption of truth. In an age of faith, a beautifully made map, created in a holy monastery, would carry an almost divine authority. And our protagonist is being asked to turn that authority into a weapon. How many historical border disputes were settled based on maps that were deliberately falsified for political gain? Did mapmakers ever use their skills to create paper towns, or other fictional features to serve their patrons, leaving a legacy of confusion for future generations? and what other forms of scholarly documents, from genealogies to histories, were commissioned and forged to create a false legitimacy for a powerful ruler. Number 3, what if you were the last speaker of a dead language? The idea your language is dying. It is the tongue of your ancestors, the language of the hills and valleys where you live. But the kingdom's official language, the language of the merchants and the law courts, has taken over. The young people don't speak the old tongue anymore. They say it's backwards, useless. You were the last one. The last person on earth who knows the old songs, the old poems, the true names of the mountains. A scholar from the capital arrives. He wants to document your language before it disappears forever. He sees it as a curiosity. For you, it is your entire world. Linguistic diversity in the Middle Ages was far greater than it is today. While Latin was the language of the church and scholarship, and major languages like French, English, and German were consolidating, hundreds of other local languages and dialects existed. Many of them were pushed to the brink of extinction. The Cumbric language, a Celtic tongue spoken in parts of northern England and southern Scotland, likely died out around the 12th century. The Cornish language went into a steep decline. This process of language death is a story of cultural assimilation and loss. Our protagonist is the final repository of a whole culture. When they die, the language dies. The unique way their people had of describing the world, the specific words for different kinds of snow, the grammar that reflects a different way of thinking will be gone. The story is a quiet elegiac one. It's about the relationship between the last speaker and the scholar. The scholar is not a villain. He is well-intentioned. He sees the value in preserving the language as a set of data vocabulary lists, grammatical rules. He is trying to save it, to pickle it in a jar for other scholars to look at. But the last speaker experiences the language as a living thing. It is the sound of their mother singing a lullaby. It is the punchline of a joke their grandfather told. They don't want it documented, they want it spoken. The conflict is gentle but profound. The scholar asks for a word for river. The speaker gives him the word, but knows it's not enough. The word is tied to a story about the river spirit, a story the scholar has no time for. The scholar wants to be efficient. The speaker wants to be understood. The story would be filled with the beauty of the language itself, with fragments of old poems and songs. It would be a meditation on what is lost when a language dies. It's not just words. It's a world. The protagonist might have a choice to make. Do they cooperate with the scholar, ensuring that at least a shadow of their language survives in a book? Or do they refuse, letting the language die with them, keeping it pure and whole rather than letting it become a dead specimen for academic dissection? It's a story about memory, legacy, and the impossible weight of being the end of a line that stretches back thousands of years. How many languages vanished without a trace during the Middle Ages, leaving no written records behind? What unique ideas, stories, and ways of understanding the human condition disappeared with them? And as a scholar recorded the last words of a dying language, did they ever feel the profound ethical weight of what they were doing, acting as both a preserver and an undertaker for an entire culture? Number 2, what if the holy relic you made was a masterpiece? Here's the prompt. You are a forger of holy relics. It's a dirty, cynical business. You take a pig's bone, boil it, and sell it to a desperate village as the finger of a saint. You make a good living from the faith of others, but you are also a master craftsman. One day you decide to create your masterpiece, a thorn, from the crown of thorns. Find the perfect piece of wood, you carve it with all your skill, you age it, stain it, and place it in a beautiful jewel-encrusted reliquary that you also made. It is the most beautiful and convincing thing you have ever created. You sell it to a great cathedral, and then a miracle happens. A sick child touches the reliquary containing your fake thorn and is healed. The cult of relics was a massive part of medieval Christianity. A holy relic, a bone of a saint, a piece of the true cross, a vial of the Virgin Mary's milk was a physical connection to the divine. Churches and cathedrals vied to possess the most powerful relics. They brought pilgrims, and pilgrims brought money. During the Fourth Crusade in 1204 saw the sacking of Constantinople, which unleashed a flood of Byzantine relics, real and fake, into Western Europe. The market was saturated. Forgery was rampant. Guibert of Nogent, a 12th century abbot, wrote a treatise called On Relics that criticized the whole practice, pointing out how many churches claim to have the same saint's head. Our protagonist is a part of this cynical trade. They are an artist, but their art is deception. They are not a believer. They see faith as a weakness to be exploited. The creation of the fake thorn is the pinnacle of their craft. It is a work of pure godless artistry, and then it performs a miracle. This event shatters the forger's world. Everything they believed about faith, about God, about their own cynical work is called into question. Was it a coincidence, a psychosomatic reaction, or was it a real miracle? And if it was a real miracle, what does that mean? Did God use their lie to create a truth? Did the faith of the pilgrims who came to see the thorn somehow make it holy? The forger becomes obsessed. They start to follow the relic's career. More miracles are reported. The cathedral becomes a major pilgrimage site. The forger's lie has become a source of genuine hope and healing for thousands of people. They are tormented by their creation. They are the secret author of a holy phenomenon. Do they confess? To do so would destroy the faith of thousands. It would ruin the cathedral. It would be an act of incredible cruelty, but to stay silent is to live with the knowledge that this great center of faith is built on their lie. The story becomes a deep philosophical exploration of the nature of faith and reality. Does an object's authenticity matter more than the good it inspires? It's a story that could only happen in a world where belief was powerful enough to reshape reality itself. How many of the most famous relics of the Middle Ages, venerated by millions, were actually clever forgeries? Did any of the forgers, like our protagonist, ever have a crisis of conscience? And what is the ultimate unanswerable question? If enough people believe in a lie with enough sincerity, can that belief itself make the lie become true and even miraculous? Number one, what if you were going blind and your job was to create light? The final prompt: you are a master illuminator, a monk in a scriptorium. Your life is dedicated to creating beautiful illuminated manuscripts. You work with gold leaf and brilliant pigments made from ground-up jewels and exotic insects. You create images of saints and angels, so beautiful they are said to be a window into heaven. You are creating light on the page, but your own light is failing. You are slowly going blind. Every day, the lines get a little blurrier, the colors are a little duller. You have one last manuscript to finish, the masterpiece of your life, the book you believe will earn you your place in heaven. And you are in a race against the darkness closing in on your own eyes. The scriptorium of a monastery was a place of quiet, intense labor. Before the printing press, every book was a handmade object. It could take a team of scribes and illuminators years to produce a single Bible. These weren't just books, they were sacred objects, works of art. The Book of Kells, an Irish manuscript from around 800 AD, is a breathtaking example of the art form. The pigments used were sourced from all over the known world. Lapis lazuli for blue came from Afghanistan. The red came from the Kermes insect. The process was slow, painstaking, and required incredible eyesight and a steady hand. Our protagonist's entire identity is tied to this skill. He is Brother Thomas, the Illuminator. It is his gift from God. Now, God seems to be taking that gift away. The story is an internal, personal drama set against the quiet, ordered world of the monastery. His struggle is secret at first. He tries to hide his failing vision. He moves his work closer to the window. He uses magnifying glasses made of polished quartz. He relies on muscle memory. But he makes mistakes. A line of gold leaf goes astray. The fine detail on an angel's wing is smudged. His younger apprentice, who both reveres and envies him, starts to notice. The abbot has given him the most important commission of all to illuminate a new book of Revelation. It is the perfect and most terrifying final project, a book filled with visions of divine light and apocalyptic darkness. As his physical vision dims, he has to rely more and more on his internal spiritual vision. The story is about art, faith, and fragility. It's a race against time, but the opponent is his own body. Does he tell the abbot and risk being taken off the project? His life's work left unfinished. Does he trust his apprentice to help him, to be his eyes, even though he fears the apprentice will surpass him? You know, the narrative could be structured around the creation of the final pages of the manuscript. As he paints the final glorious vision of the New Jerusalem, his own world is becoming a blur of shadows. It's a powerful metaphor for the act of creation itself, bringing light into the world, even as you feel the darkness inside. What did medieval craftsmen do when their physical skills began to fail them in an era with no concept of retirement or disability pensions? How many masterpieces of art and craft were left unfinished, their creators succumbing to age, illness, or accident? And what was the secret personal and spiritual cost to the anonymous artists who dedicated their entire lives to creating objects of such transcendent beauty, pouring their own light and life onto the page until there was nothing left?